Hey guys, Sick Mr. Mulaney here. Gonna quickly go through some notes to move us through in this unit. Um, Homework is going to be ready for a quiz on Wednesday/Thursday over Genesis 3 and 4 and the notes we've taken on that. So yeah, I know that most classes got to this, but in case your class didn't, we were talking about the Proto-Evangelium, which is another name for the first gospel. And it refers to this verse in Genesis chapter 3. God is talking to the serpent. And you don't have to write down this verse, but I would write down the citation here, Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. It's God talking to the serpent before he's even talking to before he's even talked to Adam or Eve. He curses the serpent and says, I will put enmity or hatred between you and the woman, between your offspring and hers. They will strike at your head, while you strike at their heel. So notice we're talking about the serpent and the woman, the serpent's offspring and the woman's offspring. They, the woman's offspring, will strike at the serpent's head. The serpent will strike at the offspring's heel, which is to say it's going to be a death blow for the serpent. But the serpent will get an ankle bite in there, which all this is the first prediction or promise of salvation. God is saying, yeah, serpent, you won this one, but you will lose in the end. I'm going to send my son, uh, who will strike at your head. He'll destroy you. You'll get in an ankle bite, which is the passion and death of Jesus. This is also why one of Mary's oldest titles is New Eve. So she is like the Eve 2.0. And while you'll find underneath her feet in most statues and artwork a serpent, because she is the fulfillment of this verse, which is pretty cool to think about. Like the first thing that God says after we sin is, I'll rescue you. And then he gets into the punishments that we covered. So, let's move on to Genesis 4 and 5. Alright, we're talking about Cain and Abel. Cain and Abel, why can't these two just get along? So, you guys remember the story. Cain and Abel are brothers. They both offer sacrifice. For some reason, we're not told. It's not clear, really. Abel's sacrifice is acceptable. Cain's is not. And as that footnote that I showed you explains, the point isn't to explain why one sacrifice was acceptable versus why not another one. The point of the story is to show what happens once that sacrifice isn't accepted. And what we see is envy. Envy is often used like interchangeably with jealousy, but in a technical theological sense, envy is always bad. Jealousy can actually be good. Jealousy just means to desire what another person has, not necessarily to take it away from them, but to also attain it for yourself. So, like, we're supposed to be jealous of the saints and their holiness. Envy is, I see you having something good, and it makes me sad, or I'm angry, or downtrodden because of the good thing that you have. So, sports teams, like, or followers or fans of sports teams often feel this, like, well, our team lost, but it's okay because your team lost too. Or I remember feeling this a lot with my brothers and sister, like, ha, your favorite toy got destroyed. I'm glad, because it means you're less happy now. It's not a good thing. It's not spiritually healthy. So, that's what Cain feels, and he gives into personal sin. Personal sin is one of two types of sin that we're going to look at. The other one is social sin. Personal sin is the kind of sins that you and I commit. It's just an individual person doing it and an individual person responsible for what happens. Social sin is going to be more collective based, society wide. Personal sin, Cain kills Abel. And yeah, it's rough. This the story of Cain killing Abel. Cain becomes the first murderer. So already, Adam and Eve, we see pretty quickly within one generation, the sin is getting worse. It's already turned into murder. Um, while we're on the topic of personal sin, let's look at the two types of personal sin: venial and mortal. Venial sounds really fancy, but it just means like minor or, um, yeah, not a killer thing. It goes against God or offends God, remember, but does not destroy the relationship with Him. So, a million bajillion venial sins are not as bad as one mortal sin, because that's the other type. Mortal sin destroys one's relationship with God. So, this is you saying screw you to God. So how do you know if it sin's mortal? All three things here have to be taken together and be true at the same time. It has to be grave matter. This means serious stuff. It's not just a minor thing. It could be life or death, or it could be something that is super important for your spiritual life or for the life of another. Full knowledge of one's actions, so you know what you're doing. It's not like you were acting out of ignorance. You didn't know that something was bad. Um, and then free consent. Nobody was holding a gun to your head. You weren't pressured by outside circumstances or desperation or force of habit, so addiction, that would impair your consent. You were totally free to do something else, and yet you still chose it. So, yeah, I was just discussing this with my wife last week, like, which gives you an insight into the Mulaney household. But yeah, mortal sin, you can think of it as like in your relationship with another human person, something that's so bad that it needs to be dealt with. You can't just ignore it. Um, yeah, like you've been seriously insulted, or it would just be strange and a lie to pretend like nothing happened. That's a mortal sin in our relationship with God. It's the sort of thing that is so important to the spiritual life that you can't ignore it. It needs to be dealt with. Venial sins are the things that it's water on a bridge, or it's NBD, no big deal. And this is why I say like a million bajillion venial sins aren't as bad as one mortal sin. So, the remedy for any mortal sin is confession. The Catholic Church teaches that there is literally no sin, actually only one sin, that cannot be forgiven. And that is the refusal to be repentant, or the refusal to ask for forgiveness. By definition, it's the one sin that the church teaches God can't forgive. Everything else, literally anything else, the church teaches that God will forgive it if we are sorry and go to confession. Yeah, it's all good. God's mercy trumps all of our sins. So, we'll pause there And yeah, hope you have a good rest of the day.